Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming to our Open Science panel. This is the last event in the series, or the Douglas Open Science Training Series that we did over the last year. What we're going to do today is I'm just going to present for a few minutes about what the training series was last year for those of you that weren't around. And then after that, we're going to have a panel with several of the speakers, including Tosh here, who is in person, and several others who are online. So the topic is Open Science Panel, all you need to know about open science practices. I just wanted to start to give an overview of what open science practices are. There's many, many different practices of open science, and the idea is that you can practice open science at all levels of the research cycle. So this can include things like putting a pre-registration online, co-designing your research with people with lived experience at the ideation stage, at the data collection stage. You could share your data with others, you can share your code, and then once you're publishing your work, you can do preprints or open access publishing, which is one of the more well-known open science practices. And then, of course, when you're communicating your research, you can communicate this in many different ways, and you can integrate the lay community in your communications so that your science is more open and available to everybody else. So the idea of open science is really just to make your work transparent, reproducible, and something that can be shared with the broader community. So as I said last year, or over the past year, we had a series of events here at the Douglas where we had speakers who were experts in different open science practices come in and talk about the work that they do. I just want to highlight a little bit some of the different events that took place, and then I'll talk a little bit more about what we're going to be doing over the next academic year, and then we can open up to the panel. So I gave the first presentation. I was really more of an overview of open science practices. So I just gave a much longer version of what I just gave you in the last slide, talked a little bit about the different open science practices, how you can practice them, some useful tips and tricks, as well as software or websites where you can start to look into this, and some of the academic and societal impacts that they have as well. We have a paper coming out, or that we're in preparation to submit for publication, that you can stay tuned for and ask me more about if you're interested. And I'll talk in the very last slide about how you can find our slides for all of these events and the videos as well. Our second event was by Robin Demule. So she's here today online to talk with us. She's a coordinator of scholarly communications at McGill University Libraries, and she talked about open access publishing. And we focus on open access publishing as the first event in our series because it was really approachable for many people. Everybody kind of knows what it is, who's in research, whether they've published openly or not. But what was really interesting about this talk was that Robin talked about different ways that you can make your work accessible freely without having to pay these exorbitant open access fees, and also talked about some of the support that McGill can give us. Next, we had Tosh Watson, who's here today, and Chelsea Cufaro, who are lived experience coordinators at the Center of Excellence in Youth Mental Health. They talked about co-design. Co-design refers to a broad set of practices that integrates people that are not generally in the research milieu with the research itself. So this could be, for example, lay community, or it can also be people with lived experience of psychosis. And this is really what they focused on during their presentation. The important thing about co-design is that it really does give a voice to people with different experiences and with lived experience of the topic that you're looking at. Next, we had a presentation by Bonnie Barnett here at the IUHSSC, who talked about knowledge mobilization and how we can turn knowledge into action and disseminate our research findings to broad audiences. And then later on, we had a presentation by Justine Hansen, a PhD candidate at the Neuro, who has now completed her PhD and has gone on to bigger and better things. She talked about her work looking at open data, and basically, which involves contacting a large amount of researchers to ask for their data to integrate into a really exciting neuroscience platform. So this was a really interesting foray into data reuse and also into data sharing from the other perspective. And Earlier this year, Alyssa Rod, who's a research data management specialist at McGill University Libraries, talked about sensitive data, which is really pertinent to us here at the Douglas, and talked about how it can be managed carefully and strategies for sharing data ethically. And then finally, Dylan Roskams Idris talked about open licenses and open innovation. So he is the network lead in education and events at Conscience, a nonprofit, and talked about some of these considerations in terms of intellectual property of your work and how open licenses can help you share but also retain your intellectual property. So today we have most of our speakers from our different events. Some of them couldn't make it here today, but we have Robin Demule, me, Dylan, Alyssa, and Tosh. And Tosh is here sitting with us in person. And so we have our expertise in certain areas of open science, but we also do have a broad range of knowledge in open science in general. So we really do want to open up this panel to any questions that you have about open science practices, about different ways that you can do open science. And then we can basically talk about how open science can be more accessible for all of you. The idea here is that we do have some questions that I'm just preparing. But we really do want to hear from you guys, and we want the panel to kind of follow what you want to know about. So please, feel free to raise your hand and or raise your hand on Zoom as well, and we can discuss any of the questions that you have. And before we get started, I just wanted to talk a little bit about where you can find some of our slides and recordings from these events. So the slides are on the Open Science Framework. If you don't know what the Open Science Framework is, I suggest you take a look. It's a really nice platform to share your work openly. We also have the recordings on YouTube that you can watch. And then next year, again, supported by the Tremplin Ambassador Award, we are going to be starting a series of Douglas Open Science workshops. These workshops are going to be more hands-on, unlike our previous series of training events that were more theoretical. So now trainees are going to be able to come in and learn about how to actually do all of these different practices. So you'll hear more about that in the coming weeks. And please take a look at the Douglas newsletter and other newsletters to learn more about when and where that will be. And of course, if you need help, we have an open science website at the douglas.research.mcgill, and you can contact us at our email, openscienceouverte@comtl.sss.gouv.qc.ca. So while you're marinating on potential questions to ask, I'm just going to stop sharing and we can get started with the panel. Okay, so everybody can see everybody online, and I just wanted to start with something simple. So I'd like to kind of go through each of the panelists today and just ask you what initially drew you to your open science practice. So Robin, would you like to get started?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. So, how I got started, for me, this is also from someone who does research in the humanities mostly. But for me, it's always seemed sensible as I've progressed in my thinking and learning that scientific inquiry, like we want the best evidence, we want to have that conversation. So, um, being open just makes the most sense to me. I also I challenge a lot of the assumptions we have in research and in the ways that we all work in academia as searchers, like regardless of discipline, in terms of looking for always having to be original or first, and this idea of exclusivity and where it comes from. Um, I'll probably do it again, but to me, a lot of it seems like a capitalist force bringing us into competition with each other. Why are we marketing that way? Why do we have to push for new versus reproducible and open? Why are we hiding? So that's so for it's also like a moral and political issue for me. But if we want that conversation, if we do want that scholarship to happen, like I want everything. I want to know what's out there. I want to think based on what I see out there, and that has to be open to me.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dylan, would you like to go next?
For sure, happy to. I hope everybody can hear me. I'm tapping into my musical theater roots to be able to project for the diaphragm. So I've always been absolutely fascinated by science. I come from a family of scientists. There was talk around the dinner table, not so much about the latest TV show, but about latest yeast lines that my stepfather was able to get. So it's always been something that's central to what I do. And then weirdly, I guess I went into law school and saw the interconnection between science, law, and society that happens with intellectual property. That's really why intellectual property exists. However, when I looked forward and contemplated the future that was being an intellectual property attorney, it's really about how do we like kind of lock down knowledge and parse it and put it into a little package so that someone can turn it into a like saleable product, which is like all fine and good, I suppose, but it was just not something that I was particularly interested in pursuing. I was more interested in thinking about how we can facilitate the sharing of knowledge and the collaborative development of knowledge and turning that into technologies or services or just different cultural practices that can actually help people. So that was my kind of left turn after law school into open science, and that I connected with the Canadian CONP, the Canadian Open Neuroscience Platform, and was able to work on that, which was a really fascinating experience. I got to like sit down and just stare really hard at open science and intellectual property for a year, and I'm not sure I've ever had a more stimulating year intellectually.
That was great. Thank you so much. Um, Alyssa, would you like to go next?
Sure. So, I got into open science actually from a teaching point of view. Before I was at McGill, I was running a center at Barnard College, which is a women's college in New York that's part of Columbia University. And I was running a center that was designing trainings for undergraduate students to learn how to work with like empirical data and also how to analyze it and how to manage it and deal with it. And we had this sort of out of the box workshop that we would do for Excel that had like a set of data that had X and Y. And I was like, at some point, this is boring. And I told my grad student, like, find me some data that's like interesting. And so like people will be engaged in this. And anyway, she came back and she was like, I have this data set. It's so interesting. Or I have this like idea. I read this article. It's like super relevant to everybody, but I cannot find this data set anywhere. And so, there was like an article published in a top economics journal that she wanted to like draw the data from. So we ended up trying to find it, then emailing the person who had like written this article, and he was like, "Oh, sure, here, it's attached to my email." Like, I never thought about anybody wanting this, or like I just assumed it would be somewhere or something, without having to do anything. So that was really eye-opening that there were, a lot of like data that could be used in, just in educational purposes. That's super interesting, super relevant to people. And no one had thought to care for it or to make it available. And this was a while ago, so it was just getting started and there wasn't as much infrastructure in place. And so when I came to McGill and was sort of put in charge of our institutional data repository, it allowed me to think about it from the other side in terms of how do we foster this culture? How do we create good habits and standards for folks so that we can be sharing data, not just for research, but also just in general, so we can all learn about something by actually, getting our hands on it and working with it. So that's a little bit about how I got started.
Yeah, I always find it interesting how much people are willing to share but don't know how. And so that is really kind of a roadblock. Tosh, how did you get started?
Yeah, first. How I got into like engaging communities with open science and research. So I started out, I have a background in building community and community development. And I really focused on working with youth at risk, which is a broad term, but so before this, I was working at a school for youth. It was a kind of an alternative school that kind of works a little bit differently for youth and need a bit more support. I was a youth counselor there, and we would have these kind of workshops, these meetings where people could kind of share what they're going through, talk about these subjects that are important to them, including mental health. And I thought, okay, wow, this is great to kind of build community by like talking about mental health. In like in a way that's comfortable and safe, and then kind of finding out about the the opportunity here at the Douglas, being a living experience coordinator, I was like, oh, that's a really cool opportunity, you know, so I left the school there after 3 years and I came here and, I'm the PI that works at my center, Dr. Leonard Palaniappan, you know, he really is a big advocate for including people with lived experience in the research, so I started doing that and it's been really great. It's been a really good opportunity to have people and especially young people like people 12 to 17 who maybe are not, you know, like in these conversations or know what research is, having them included, you know, in research and having them meet with doctors and researchers and kind of having this conversation where they can learn from each other has been really great. So and like as Katie was said, like it's important to have people with lived experience of a mental health struggle or navigating the system, but also just the community and broad too. So the people we work with, some people are kind of in the system, they know a lot about research or about mental health practices, and some people don't as well. But it's good to kind of bring people who are kind of outside of it too, so they can learn. And as I said before, kind of teach each other like the realities of people in the community and the realities of people that are actually, you know, studying. And I think it's important to, you know, for researchers to talk to the people that they're studying. You know what I mean? Like it makes sense. If you're doing a study on someone who has lived experience with psychosis, you should speak to someone who has been through that, right? So that's how I got into it, and it's been a great opportunity.
Thanks. I guess in my case, I took a traditional academic route. So it was really during my postdoc that I was introduced to open science at a more detailed level. So I did my graduate studies in neuroscience and my undergrad in psych and psychology. And I even during my grad studies in neuroscience, I wasn't really very introduced to open science practices. Even though neuroscience is kind of one of the meccas for open science, it just happened to be the case that in my lab, which was a great lab, so I'm not, you know, saying anything negative about that, but it was just the case that we didn't, you know, do any open science practices or anything like that. But once I came to do my postdoc here at McGill, at the Neuro and at the Douglas, there was a lot more of open science happening in general, especially at the Neuro and more now at the Douglas. So I learned about, you know, how people integrate open science into their work, including, you know, preprints, though I knew a bit about preprints before, but preprints, open code and that kind of thing. So I learned quite a bit about all of that, and I got really excited. And just like Robin was saying, it was really something that connected with my values as an academic, and it was something that I felt kind of like driven to continue and to kind of push forward in my own work and in that of now my students. So that was how I got into open science in general. And then once I got the position here as a faculty member, there was a kind of a part of that role was to lead the Douglas Open Science program. So that was how I got really into doing this on a more like daily basis and part of my regular work. And essentially, I'm now working on integrating my overall research with open science promotion more generally, whereas before it was just I was, you know, practicing open science in my work, but now it's really going to be integrating a little bit more of the two on an everyday basis. So we'll open the questions to everybody. Any questions to all or any of our panelists about their open science work or what you guys are interested in? And if not, you can just raise your hand at any time and I'll just keep going with the questions that we have. So I'd like to open the entire panel to this. So just raise your hand if you're interested in responding. But one of the things, oh yeah, sorry, in the back. Yeah. Yeah.
But for projects involving like a large coding component, what is like the best practices that people have found to share that and make it easily understandable? Like what are some of the best practices that
So the question is about best coding practices. So I'm happy to take this one as I tend to do quite a bit of this in my work. You know, there's a lot. I might not know all the best practices. I'm not a programmer by training, but obviously something like GitHub is going to be your main place to put your code. This is where everybody puts their code from, any kind of software engineering to to tech to Netflix is on there. There's tons of stuff that's on there. So that's really going to be your go-to for where you want to make your code available online. When I say code, I don't want everyone who doesn't feel they code for their eyes to gloss over, because code includes a lot of different things. It includes R code. It includes SPSS syntax, probably, technically, because this is something that is kind of a script that you can rerun over and over. It includes something like a website. It's really, really broad. So everything that you do that could be constituted as some kind of automated process or something like this could be included in code. So there's a lot of ways, and this is one of the best ways, I think, for trainees, and this is kind of getting into a later question, but this is one of the best ways, I think, for trainees to get started with open science, is just to put up their analysis code for their research, because you have complete ownership over that code. You're the one that wrote it, presumably, and you can basically just put that available for everyone else. So in terms of best practices, some of the best practices are to use versioning with code and software. So this essentially means that you don't just put up your final version, you kind of put up code as you're going. So you kind of start uploading your first, general iteration of your first version, and then as you make changes, you're uploading them every time. And this is already baked into software like websites like GitHub. And it already does all of this for you. So you just kind of upload it again and it will create a new version and so on. So you can really track the changes that occurred over time. And something like GitHub really allows you to work collaboratively with other people, which is a really exciting kind of way to integrate openness in your work, is to allow other people to kind of help you with or add pieces or modify the work that you've done. One example I can give is I put up some code for a new analysis connectivity technique a few years ago. And at one point, I think 6 months later or something, I got an email from somebody in, I think, Japan, who said, "Oh, I think there's like a bug in your code. Like, shouldn't it be like this?" And it was exactly right. So I fixed the code, and that was really something quite nice, that someone from across the world was able to integrate their own expertise into my work. Kathy? Yeah.
There's a question on Zoom about, have you ever seen any pushbacks against open science practices by institutions like universities or journals? And what's the most challenging scenario to practice open science?
Can you all hear that one online? Yeah. Alyssa, I see your hand.
Oh yeah, I know Robin wants to talk about journals, but I'm gonna just say something really quick about the most challenging scenario, and I think it ties back to the talk I gave as part of the series, where I think in terms of the data side, I think the most challenging thing we're working with now is how to balance like sensitive data with open science, and how to adjust our frameworks for data that like can't be made publicly available, but also where we don't have like good infrastructure to share that information in a way that makes it easy to work with, or easy even to verify the findings and publications. So I think that's a super big challenge right now, especially in Canada in general. And I'm not sure there's like really good solutions in the short term. I know that there's a lot of projects trying to spin up work in this area to like make it more feasible to share data openly, but also in a closed way somehow. So that's where we're getting into this wall of like having to redefine what it means for data that have privacy considerations, where you can't really strip it without losing the meaning of the data. And I think that one challenge is also having people think a bit like more critically about that. And so one issue with open science I find is that people sometimes, you have this like full on it's open or nothing. So people go a little bit too far on one side, and there's so much nuance in what we do when we're working with humans in particular, and the kind of information that we have about them, or the kind of communities we might be working with, that I think that we should, maybe one challenge is taking a step back and like thinking a little bit more critically about like the nuances involved in all of this as well.
Yeah, great point. Robin?
Just a wholehearted yes to like open for open sake. Thank you for what you said, Elisa. From like coming back to the idea of scientific inquiry is a conversation and wanting like the best evidence and to be out there, right? Like that's why we're doing this. We write into the void, and the best thing that we can hope for is an answer. And I think um, the pushback from journals, again, not all journals, but there are definitely publishers out there with profit as a main motive that may be a little more resistant, um, or just downright like against opening without guaranteeing that profit. That's not to say that all journals are out there like trying to nickel and dime you for every cent you have, but we do live in I almost said, okay, I'm going to say we live in a society um, where we have to pay for things, and academic labor is particularly with publishing is just something that's not valued in the same way or remunerated in any sustainable way. Um, so the pushback again, wow, I'm going to be a little bit of a drumbeat today, but the pushback is for-profit publishing.
Mhm.
And you have to ask why they want the monopoly over your work, or why, because they need you more than you need them. And I'm disintegrating, I apologize.
But I think you make a good point because I don't think especially trainees understand that there's many ways to disseminate your work, and publishers really do need you. Otherwise, they would fall apart if researchers didn't publish with them. So thanks so much. Dylan?
Yeah, I think I can relatively briefly answer both of these. So for the most challenging, first of all, plus one to Alyssa's point about sensitive data. That is absolutely just like the big challenge for me, more personally in the work that I do. Um, when I talk to people about technology transfer, I'd almost really like the idea of technology transfer to just go away and for us to just concentrate on knowledge mobilization because it's all about getting the knowledge to the people who can use it. And in some contexts, that's in like a private business environment. In some contexts, it's a public policy person who can, most usefully use something. It's a member of the public, it's a patient or something like that. But going up to a institution and saying that like you really should have open science expertise in your technology transfer office to try to consider whether or not open sharing of protocols or software or whatever, what kind of open licenses you want to use is something that you need to like have embedded in your technology transfer offices. That's something that I encounter a fair amount of resistance and a lot of challenge from. And that leads into the other question about is there resistance? Um, but we've already talked about resistance on the part of journals. I think that that's true. There's also resistance on the part of institutions. I think a lot of that just comes from the fact that institutions are like they're culture-bearing entities. They don't just spring into existence and are remade at every instance. They are a bunch of people that got brought together under particular cultural context and with particular sets of incentives. And those people tend to like continue over time into the future. So if you came up at a time where the only thing you had to pay attention to was, can I get a grant and can I publish in a high impact journal? And now you're in a position of seniority and leadership and decision making within the context of an institution, that's going to be the model that you use to think about how science should be done and how science is communicated. And so if some whippersnapper comes to you and says, like, actually, we should totally redesign how we're thinking about rewarding people, how we're thinking about hiring people, how we're thinking about granting degrees, and a fundamental component of that should be that, like, every single component of your research stack should be shared in a way that's most accessible and usable by anybody else in the world. That's just a really big shift in thinking. And people are like culturally encumbered and busy, right? It takes a long time to like think about how I can fundamentally change how all of these incentives in an institution work. So like it takes just people like us slowly poking away and being like, actually, if you do, value rigor, for example, or replicability, then this is something that you really should consider. And at least most scientists are people who value kind of logic and argumentation. And so if you can present a better argument slowly over time, you can chip away and change the kind of direction of these culture-bearing institutions.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, that it's kind of the culture trying to shift a culture and the way that people do things at many different levels. So at the journal level, at the institutional level, at the level of each lab as well. So another area of stickiness can absolutely be the PIs and the culture in your own lab. It's often, like Dylan said, it's not a matter of not valuing these things, but often being worried that it's just going to add more work, or it could be like not worth it in the end. So this is why we worked on, developing this paper that we're working on the impacts of open science, so that we could talk about some of the ways that open science can benefit others. We also look at negative impacts. Hopefully that will be pre-printed soon. So yeah, definitely, I think there's a lot of levels of kind of barriers to open science, and I think it just takes these kinds of events and other things like that to open up people's eyes to how you can do open science while evading some of these barriers. So, for example, if it's like at the level of your PI, then you can do open science practices that obviously don't involve sharing your PI's data, because they're not okay with that. It's not your data. These are not things that you can do, but you can absolutely share your code. You can, ask to pre-print a paper and say that you'll do the work and it won't be more work on their part. And there's a lot of ways to get around some of these concerns. And at the institutional and the journal level, as well, as Robin so clearly demonstrated during her talk. So I hope you go and see in that one. But there's a lot of ways that we can make our work open without having to necessarily follow or deal with those barriers. Yes. Yeah.
Is it good practice to share work in progress?
Yeah, absolutely. So the question is about following up on the open code, which I'm loving to hear about open code, because I don't hear very much about it. So so it's the question is whether it's good to share a work in progress, and I think that it is. You don't want to share one line of code necessarily, but the point is to show, like, once you have kind of a minimum working product or of your minimum working script, then you can absolutely put it up there as kind of like a first version. And then when you make modifications or efficiency improvements or things like that, then you want to do that. You want to add those changes. And I think that really helps to kind of see the growth of the work as well. And it shows the direction that it's gone and the decisions that were made. So one of the things about science that's really important, that I think we probably don't do enough, even myself, is to keep track of all the decisions we make, because that's how science will kind of improve and will know not to make the same errors again. So obviously papers are part of that, where you can see what somebody else did so you don't redo it. But just in the everyday decisions that we make, we often don't have the space to report these on publications or even in the supplemental materials. So having these additional materials that kind of show your thought process can really be one way to deal with this. And then on a more, I guess, career level, it shows kind of the work that you've done. So I often ask my trainees to give me a code sample if they've done any coding before, or a paper sample or written sample, so that I can kind of get a sense of their work. And so if you have already that available and you're already doing an open science practice, for someone like me, that would be really a nice point in your favor. Plus, it gives you skills that you can bring to inside or outside academia. Robin, you wanted to jump in on that?
Just really tiny addition, that like a secondary benefit is that your community may also solve some of your problems for you as you're working on them, right? And it's like potentially a way to make connections that way as you share your code and your work. At least that's been like my real hat is as a metadata librarian. And when we share our metadata models for different things together, it's often very collaborative and work in progress like that. So.
Thanks. Other questions for the panel? Yeah, Sakiko.
Thank you. And I think my question might be to Tosh, maybe.
Of course, yeah. That's absolutely fine to ask specific questions, of course.
I'm kind of also wondering, like, oftentimes those viewers with lived experience, they're willing to share their experiences and they can contribute to the research. But also, if we think about like open science, and then for the dissemination part, I wonder if your thoughts about of those youth lived experience or more dissemination how researchers can support them.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean,
Can you repeat the question?
Huh?
Can you just repeat the question?
oh yeah, okay,
Thanks.
so really about kind of, so you talked about how, yeah, like it's good to consult, people with the experience at the beginning of the project, but then talking more about like knowledge diffusion and at the end how to like knowledge share and knowledge transfer, like what roles could youth and people with experience play with that. And so kind of more recently we've started having people come talk to our youth, our councils about how to disseminate the knowledge properly. At first, mainly it was more about consulting them on how to create the project, what kind of questions should we ask, what kind of measures should we be doing, would youth like be a part of this study, like would you be a part of the study? So we're starting to do more of like, okay, now we have the results, how can we share them, right? And we met with a PhD student a couple of weeks ago. And she did a project on youth who have suicidal thoughts and who have been going through different eating disorders. And kind of it was really like a qualitative study to kind of see how their treatment's going, what how they're going through this, and kind of getting kind of like more of a qualitative answer for that. And we're going to put that into a paper that she's going to show different clinicians so they can kind of change how they work with this specific community. And they consulted our youth and our teens to see, hey, how can we do this in a respectful way? How can we take their quotes, their data really in a qualitative way and show it in a respectable way that doesn't kind of harm what they're saying, and I think so ways like that, kind of asking, how can we share this? How can we respect the data? How can we respect the people that we're sharing? So speaking with, youth and people with lived experience about that is one way of doing it. And as I said, we are like we're all about mentorship as well. So if there's any way we can kind of like consult about best ways to, do a plain language summary, like your project we're about to do, right? Like, are there ways we can kind of give youth and the community and knowledge to kind of, make layman term versions of papers, and then kind of work together about how to do that in a way too. So really, it's important to kind of to consult people in the community. Hey, do you understand this? Like, when you read this, how's so kind of involving them in the co-creation of a knowledge dissemination, I think is important too. So those are a couple of ways that we want to explore more too. So it's a good question.
Yeah, and in my experience working with the councils, I find that they have a lot of really interesting ideas for basically knowledge dissemination in many different ways. So, and also they're youth, so they're more like familiar with some of the more popular ways these days, any kind of different things. There's a much more variety, I think, than if we're just like sticking with our usual presentations and panels and things like that today. So,
and there's certain ways that, like I know at McGill, there's the Healthy Brains, Healthy Lives. It's their EDI training committee that they're working with patient partners and creating like light presentations and stuff, like kind of like like ways that we can kind of present a presentation of the findings in like an easy to read way. So they're working with people like patient partners to create that too. So there's programs that are kind of just starting now, working with youth and patients to kind of like create these light presentations to then show at symposiums and talks like this. So yeah, the work is happening.
Mhm. Anna, you had a question?
Yeah, I wonder if there might be any considerations or like implications in the past few years for open science with like the rise of like things like AI and ChatGPT, like what maybe things have changed or like what new things have to be thought about. And I'm thinking about things like the reproducibility of like code and stuff like that. So I just wondered if
Yeah, the question is about whether considerations of open science need to change with changing times, including AI, generative AI, specifically about code, for example. Who wants to field this one? I'm looking at you, Dylan.
I mean, I'm not
I know you're
an
not.
AI expert, but like
Yeah.
I think the answer, and anybody who's an open science advocate would agree that like yes, the whole point of open science as a thing is an acknowledgement of the fact that given new cultural and technological context, the way we consider science has to change. But it's not as if like this particular set of open science practices that came about in the last like 10 years is some final state that is going to be the perfect version of how we share science. The cultural and technological landscape within which science operates is going to continue to evolve, in which case, what we consider good practice, both in conduct as well as the dissemination of research, is also going to have to change. AI is absolutely going to be a part of this. I mean, we could go into a whole bunch of really interesting technological, metaphysical, and moral weeds when it comes to AI, but like, yeah, when it comes to the underlying values of sharing your work in such a way that other people can understand it, AI definitely complicates this situation because if we're dealing with a black box system, um, how do you share the reasoning that went on inside of it such that other people can replicate it? These are also not deterministic systems. So if you ask a question to ChatGPT or something like that, and I ask the same question in a different context, we might get different results. In which case, if you're using a tool that gives different results to the same input every time, that also presents a complicating situation for when it comes to trying to like rigorously replicate results over geographies and time. So yes, I guess that's a really long-winded way of answering the question and saying like, yes, we're absolutely going to have to adapt and change. The last thing I would say is that like one example is just look at the definition of open source. So open source software. There's a certain set of freedoms that are associated with it. You can look at the open source initiative if you're interested in seeing what those are, but they're all about making sure that people can understand, use, share, and study really the like code. If you try to adapt that to AI, you can't just talk about the like code that implements it. You have to talk about the weights and the data and the architecture that underlies any particular AI system, which is just an example of how people who are committed to the idea of openness within a particular technological context have had to really carefully consider how that same concept applies within another related but still distinct and different and interesting technological context. All right, I'll stop talking. Alyssa
Yeah.
has a point.
Alyssa.
Oh yeah, no, I was going to talk about something else. That's all like yes, very like very like a lot to think about in terms of like the reproducibility aspect. But I was also thinking I'm always going back to like the sensitive data or the human data thing, and I'm always thinking about, how do you balance people's privacy and confidentiality with like making their information openly available? And I think in the past, like it had been very straightforward. You anonymize it, you put it out there, great, whatever. And I think now there are a couple implications of that. Like one being that if for data that had been shared in the past 10 years ago before like AI was a thing that, maybe if like, maybe people wouldn't have consented to having their information in training data sets, but now it's sort of a moot point because it's out there. If it's licensed openly, it can be used in that kind of way. So I think that just highlights that it's difficult to anticipate a lot of the like new risks that will come up in the future, and that anonymization is an ongoing process. It's not like a one and done thing. So now there are these technologies that can maybe more easily connect different data sets to each other that we couldn't do ourselves manually. And so that poses other kinds of risks that we don't even know the extent of it, in terms of like what's the impact on the risk of re-identification of some of these data that didn't exist before. And I'm not sure I've seen a lot of good work out there thinking about this or looking into like how easy that would be or how difficult it would be, and whether there should be any adjustments in our understanding of, how to keep things confidential while still making them available. So I think that's super early days, and we don't really there's a lot of uncertainty around that, I think, and what the impact is going to be on open science. It could have a negative impact because, it's feeding straight into systems that take up a lot of energy and resources, and it's not clear what the direct benefit is to the people contributing that information anymore, right? That link is a bit more tenuous. So yeah, I'm not sure if anyone's actually having conversations about this. It actually just popped into my mind, but just something I think of as well is that now we have these tools that can facilitate like the merging of data in ways that we never were able to do in the past, and that might have implications for this as well.
Totally. And sorry if I could just respond to that.
No, go
And then
ahead.
on the flip side, right, it's not as if that's totally a negative because the ability to combine data in ways that produce useful insights in ways that we didn't have the technology before could lead to like really fascinating new discoveries. It's just that like part and parcel, like part of the same exact capability that lets us combine data to produce new insights is the same type of capability that will allow us to combine data that might enable people to find out who you are or to like connect your data to you and like to use data in unethical ways. In which case, like, I don't know if there's any way other than like, I don't think there's a technological way to solve that problem, to say we only use the good stuff and we can't use the bad stuff. We need to come up with like really interesting cultural norms around how we use these kinds of tools and how we use this data. Because I don't think there's, yeah, either a technical or a law or a legal solution that will solve it for us.
Well, a lot of it's also cultural, right? And how we develop technology and how it becomes adopted and how we see it. And then who's driving the car, right? Like who's driving this AI bus? Is it people that are interested in the advancement of science and scientific inquiry for the better of all? Is it Silicon Valley that is maybe more profit oriented? I'm sorry, I am waving my pinko flag today. Uh, but like who's using it and why is it immediately a good? And do we trust the people dominating the conversation right now and giving us a technology that maybe we need, maybe we don't understand, maybe we need to do more work. Do we have the space to do that work? And are we able to do this kind of like, can we trust them to bring in these moral implications and ethical considerations?
Thanks. That was really rich response, I think, to the question of AI and open science. I think there's probably no answer yet, and it will be something that will evolve over time as the way we use AI is evolving as well already so quickly over time. Other questions for the panelists? Yes.
I'm wondering, like, do we think that implementing open science will help with reporting negative results? Because right now, like, that's a big problem, right? Like, people only really publish significant findings, which probably results in a lot of waste of resources and time of like repeating experiments that we just don't know have been failing.
Mhm.
So, like, what do you think open science, like, will that help maybe with these, like, publishing negative findings?
Mhm.
I hate saying that, but.
Yeah, so the question is about publishing negative findings and whether open science is going to facilitate that. And we didn't get a chance to do an event on this last year, but one of the events that we were trying to get put together was one on registered reports. So if you haven't heard of registered reports before, these are essentially papers that get submitted before they get analyzed or run, or before they get written. So the idea there is that it goes through peer review at that early stage, and it's peer reviewed and accepted based on the merit of the science and not on the results that come out of it. And so there are many journals that follow this registered report system, and the idea is essentially that it would lead to more non-significant findings being published, and so a more accurate representation of the science world, essentially. And we found this is the case. It does increase the number of non-significant findings in our paper, but the interesting thing about that is no matter what your findings are, it's kind of agreed to be published, and you can kind of follow through with the journal. They've already kind of committed to it, so it's really a nice way to approach this idea of, you know, only publishing significant findings. But at the same time, we've had a lot of success in my group and others around us of publishing non-significant findings in traditional journals. So especially if your methods and your sample size and all of that is high quality and good fidelity, then what you're showing essentially is that, you know, the next person doesn't have to do this again, and you're kind of showing that these research questions, at least at this level of inquiry, are maybe not worth digging too much deeper into. Or I'll give an example. So we had a paper essentially looking at changes in the brain in first episode psychosis. And essentially what we found was that there were no changes at the level of the first episode. And some of the students were, you know, unhappy because they had non-significant results. And I tried to clarify that, in fact, this is good because the brains are not yet affected at this early stage of the disease. So in fact, it's actually beneficial that we didn't find significant findings, because it tells us that this is maybe a really important treatment critical window where we can affect treatment that would lead to less affecting of the brain happening at that time. I don't know if anybody else wants to jump in on non-significant findings, but I'm sure there's a lot to talk about that. Okay, other questions, comments? Okay, great. So I'll just, you know, start with another question while we're waiting for the pizza, which I believe is arriving very, very shortly. We did talk briefly about kind of the institutions that are barriers and the PIs that are barriers and the journals that are barriers, but I wanted to talk a little bit more positively about support and knowing about what support systems are out there. How can we essentially how can we promote open science at these different levels through, you know, lab culture, things like that? And what could each of these different levels do in order to facilitate or promote open science? It's a tough question, I know. Fine, I'll start. At the PI level, I mean, it's not easy, but I think what we're trying to do at the Douglas anyways is to emphasize to other PIs and to the institution that it doesn't mean that it's more work. So just like breaking those myths down, and then, you know, allowing the culture to change from that perspective. So basically trying to highlight what are the areas that they feel are kind of the barriers and learn about that. So we did well, before my time with the Open Science Program, we did a consultation, needs-based assessment with all of the different PIs at the Douglas, and learned about these kinds of barriers that they were dealing with in terms of practicing open science, and tailored some of the work that we do towards breaking down those barriers. And that includes things like open access is too expensive. So, oh, well, look, McGill has all of these wonderful institutional agreements with journals where you can make your work open access. You can learn more about that in our videos. And there's others as well, like, you know, puts more work on the students or the PIs, which can be the case at first, but in the end, it actually leads to much better impact, more citations, these kinds of things. Robin?
I think in my role in scholarly communications, I like to think that we try to reduce the cognitive load where we can. We really hope, like, we know what researchers are facing and the roads they're kind of going through. So we try as much as possible to meet them where they are and to try to make what you have to do as easy as possible. So I would hope that that's like, and often like particularly I see Louisa here and we have like the TOSI helpers thing that we've been doing. We've been helping Louisa with getting, like, it's work up front. Everything is work, unfortunately, but we hope in the long term that we're actually making it easier for people with their labs.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks. Yeah, it's not an easy answer, and I think if it were an easy answer, then it would be done. You know, there's a lot of people pushing for this. So
Yeah.
I guess just to finish off, I wanted to. Oh, sure. Go ahead, Dylan.
Okay, I can make this very quick. This is from the way that I've considered this question is in my career has generally been more from like an institution or funder perspective rather than an individual like researcher or lab perspective, which means that the people in this room may have limited ability to influence that for now, but it's always possible in the future that instead of becoming a research scientist, either in a private or a public institution, you're going to end up working for a journal or an institution or a funder or something like that. So when it comes to the capacity for those kinds of entities to encourage open science, I think that there are two main elements. One has to do with incentives, when it comes to, and when you're creating a good incentive, that requires setting an expectation, saying how you're going to measure whether that expectation is met, and then what you're going to do about compliance. If you don't have all three of those elements, it becomes just like an aspiration or a recommendation or something along those lines. You need to have bind those three elements together, but that's usually not enough. You also need to have like positive contributions of like educational resources or helpers that come into labs or webinars or something in order to actually enable people to meet those as so that you don't just establish an expectation that adds to the work. So if any of you ever like end up working for CIHR, please, I will help you design a much, much better policy for encouraging people to be open than currently exists.
That's a really great point. I think there's I really appreciate your three elements that really have to work for incentives to work because it is important. And I think at the same time, there's a lot of other, there's a lot of other levels where you could get support from individuals. Maybe the institution doesn't have something, I mean, maybe they have some things set up, but maybe there's also individuals who can help guide you in those directions. So there's a lot of institutional support that we receive as researchers, as trainees from different levels of the Douglas, of McGill, and so on, and even from CIHR. It might not be the best in some cases. They might not follow the best practices, or there might be elements missing, but there's still some useful information that can be gathered from these different sources. So we have a lot of support from, for example, the McGill data research management platform, and then even at the Douglas, here we have support from the different people that we've talked about today, and from us. Of course, you can get support. All of you can come and get support from the Douglas Open Science team. So these are areas where you can use your network to kind of build the support, but it is a bit more of a bottom-up process where I think you need both that bottom-up and top-down process in order to make a change. So I'll just open the panel for one last question. Is there anything that you guys wanted to make sure was said today that you wanted to kind of leave the people here with in terms of open science, where it's going, what they can do to, integrate it into their work, and what you see as important?
I can jump in on that one. So just in terms of like talking about like engaging the community and patient partners and whatnot, and kind of going back to the last question, like, there can be some barriers too for researchers who want like it might sound nice on paper. Oh, let's talk to someone who's been to, and then realistically it does add a bit more work, if you have to meet with these people, we have to get extra funding, whatnot, but like I think just doing these kind of talks like this and spreading the knowledge that these things exist, and then there are ways to do this, and just showing the results too. Like we've only been doing this at the center for a couple of years now, but we're gonna start like really ramping up our website to show what our councils have really been involved in and what projects have been funded because in part by consulting with people with lived experience, but there's more and more grants that have to include, a consultation with lived experience, like welcome the Lancet psychiatry the publications they require to have projects include people with lived experience, and if they didn't, then talk about why they didn't, you know? So I think just kind of spreading the word about like this opportunity and like really showing concrete ways of how it can benefit a project, even though it might add a bit more work, is important. So that's what I've been trying to do with Chelsea, doing these talks like this and going to different conferences and talking about what we do. So it's going in a good direction, I believe, and there's many youth advisory councils out there, loved ones as well. So we talk to parents and siblings and you know, people that support someone with a lived experience with their mental health as well. Getting their voices is really important too, especially parents, I believe, right? So it's cool to see that more people want to have them involved as well, grow the network a little bit. That's what I'll say.
Robin?
I think maybe a couple of like a layer cake of advice. I think it's not always your sole responsibility to change the system. It's a marathon, not a sprint, and you can always do something.
You can
That's going
always
to
do
change
something.
depending on your context, but it's not black and white. You're always going to be able to do something. So do what you can when you can. That's what matters. And connect to that community around you. We are here. We support you, right? We're together in this. And it's a marathon, not a sprint. Sorry, bunch of cliches, but that's the main takeaway.
Cliches, but I think that's a perfect place to leave off. Unless Dylan, you had something to add. No, great.
No,
So
well, I
I
was
just
just
want
gonna
to
agree
thank
with
all of
that.
our
So,
panelists.
yes.
I just want to thank all of you for this insightful discussion and for all the questions. I think got to like only 2 of the questions that we had prepared. So I really appreciate that. But if you have other questions, we're all open to support you, as Robin said. So please feel free to reach out to us. And we'll see all of you next time. Thanks.